some more neat things with our table here. So let's say, for example, we want to set a different background color than what it has by default here. And that's actually pretty simple to do. So if I go to my code editor here, or my interface editor rather, and bring out this side panel. So, oops, that's not what I wanted. I wanted this side panel. Yeah, so if we take a look at my row controller, so there's an instance of this for every row that we populate basically. And each of them have these same contents, right? They each have a group, and inside that group they have a label. Now the label has different content for each of them, but the group, we don't really give it any behavior at present. So if you notice, if I bring up the attributes inspector, it's just kind of a normal group object. So that means if, for example, I were to give it a background color like so, and run it, well, you know what, let's see what it does. Let's see what happens. You know, we'd be able to also do any kind of background image we wanted, anything really. And we can also set this programmatically, which is what we're going to do next here. So wait for this to load up, and we'll take a look at it. Okay, cool. So now all of our group objects have the same background color. We can add them, and because they're all instances of my row controller, it's going to add the same kind of background. Now, what if we did want to do this programmatically? Well, there is a way to do that, and it's a little bit more complex, but we'll see how it can pay off in a little bit here. So first of all, I'm going to go from here into my assistant editor, and yeah, space is kind of at a premium here, but you know what, I'm going to go to, instead of the interface controller code, I'm going to go to my row controller code. And here what I'm going to do is I'm going to make an outlet for this group. And this will basically allow us to set the background programmatically. So if I control click, bring it over like so, and let's call this one row group. Seems like as good a name as any here. So now we have a variable attached to our interface here with an outlet, and we can now manipulate this on our interface controller code. So let's go ahead, and on the left here, I'll bring up the myRowController class code. Yes, it's in the extension. Okay, so we'll bring that up on the left. On the right, we will bring up the interface controller code. Okay, so I did this so that I could kind of access and take a look at what my row controller class is looking like. So where am I going to configure this? Well, it's pretty straightforward. First of all, we have to know where we're grabbing the row controller. And I'm referring to here. So when we're kind of looping through our fruits.enumerating and we're setting up the content of each row, well, at the same time, we can also say row dot. So before we're grabbing the dot label text, but here instead we can say row dot row group, and then we can just basically set it like any other group object. So row dot row group dot set background color, and background color, I happen to know that it takes a UI color, and we'll do green, kind of like I did in our example just a second ago. Okay, so this will set the background color for each of them in fruits anyway. And let's take a look at it. Okay, build succeeded. And let's load it on up here. All right, there we go. Okay, so we can see it worked almost the same, but now if I scroll down and I add more, it doesn't have the background for those. So that's a simple fix, right? We just need to make sure that we would add that whenever we're adding rows here, right? So my table.insert rows, blah, blah, blah. We would kind of have to do the same logic. So you know what, let's go ahead and do it. So when we add here, let's do one of these. So put it above where we increment the index to insert at, but we'll say let row equals my table dot row controller. At what index? Well, where are we inserting it? So we are inserting it at index to insert at. Okay, downcast it here, my row controller class. And then we will say row.rowGroup.set background color, UI color.green. Now this seems like a little bit more work, and it is for this basic example, but if you want to kind of configure it on the fly or change it on the fly, you're going to need to be able to kind of set this programmatically. All right, so let's load that up here. And hopefully it doesn't take too long. There it goes. All right, so let's add. Okay, there we go. And it's working as intended. Great. And we can remove and add, and it's still going to have the background color. Now, what if we wanted this to be kind of more of a toggle? So if the user taps on it, it's going to change color, and then they can tap on it again to change it to the color it was previously or a different color. So how can we do that? So that is going to require a little bit more logic here. And first of all, I'm going to get rid of the stuff I just did, and we're going to do it a little bit differently. So we're only going to change the background color once it's basically tapped by the user. And then the user can kind of tap it again to reset it to it's the same color it was before, or even a different color. And really good for something like a to-do list that's in a table, right? You kind of look at it, you touch it to make sure it's a priority. You can kind of dismiss it at the same at a second touch, and that's going to look pretty neato. So before we can do that, we're going to have to understand how to access our table. So let me clean up some of my code here to get rid of some of the empty space, and just so it looks a little bit better. Yeah, we'll do one of those. Okay. And I'll put it down below here. Okay, so I'll put it under my will activate. Actually, now I'll put it up above. It doesn't exactly matter too much. So we can actually access the table if we do one of these. Override func table. And we have to say override because table, it has kind of a default method. And it's essentially the same as saying override func will activate. So we're just able to access the table in this way. And you can see that the table, whenever it's tapped, it's going to kind of run this function. So WK interface table is what it is. Did select row at, and then you can see what row was selected. So to see that in action, let's print that out. So we're going to print out the row index anytime it's basically tapped on by the user. Okay, we'll open that up in our simulator. And this is what we can use to kind of set our background color at the same time as the user taps on it, which is going to be pretty nice and look cool as well. All right, so there it goes. Let's open up our console down here, down below. Okay, and now I'm going to tap on apples, which should be index 0. Yep, there it is. This should be index 1. Right, so you can probably imagine right off the bat how this is going to be useful. So let's figure it out here. So first things first, we'll figure out how to just change the color initially when it's tapped. So we just have to tell it what controller to use. So we've done it before. Let row equals my table dot row controller at, and here we can just basically pass it in the row index for whatever was tapped on. Right, so at row index. All right, and then let's do this. So row dot row group dot set background color UI color dot green again because it stands out. Right, so we're basically we forgot to downcast it as well as my row controller class. Okay, so we're basically defining the row to use this class, which has these variables we can access. Again, so we're saying row dot row group dot set background color. Let's try it out. See what it does. Okay, loading up. Build succeeded. Give it a second here. All right, here goes. I'm going to tap it. Hey, there we go. So it doesn't go back, but we are able to tap it to highlight it. That's pretty neat. It even works for these because we already told it to use the same class. Right? They're all using our one controller class that we have. Pretty spiffy. So what about tapping it to change the color another time? Well, there's a couple ways we could do that. One way is we can basically declare a Boolean value over in our controller class that we can then access. We could also do it here in our interface controller. But let's say we wanted to kind of offload that logic into the controller class. Well, that would be simple enough. So we'll say var selected equals false. Okay, so we'll initialize it to false. And you know what, we'll also give it a type here of bool, just to be sure. And now when we access row, we can check that. So if row dot selected, okay, so if row dot selected, we will switch it. So row dot selected equals false. And here this is basically our reset action. So if it's already selected and we tap it again, we'll switch it to be false. And then we'll say row group set background color. Let's set it to maybe something that really stands out. Let's see here. Yeah, we'll do cyan just initially. And then we'll say else row.selected equals true. And we will also throw this in there. Okay, so let's take a look at what we're doing. So we're checking what the value of the selected variable is. It's going to default to false. Therefore, the first time it should run this block of code. Right? So row.selected, it'll put it to true. And it will also set the background color to green. If it's then tapped again, it should be row selected is true. Therefore, it'll run this block of code. And it's going to set it to cyan. Now let's see. That's the theory. Let's see if it actually works here once we build it and run it in the simulator. But again, it just shows another example of understanding how to manipulate variables that may be in a separate class, for example. All right, here goes. Tap once, tap again, neato. Right? And then you can kind of do it back and forth. And you can see how this logic would be pretty useful. Right? Even when we add, it's still going to be available. In our remove function, we haven't really edited that at all. Right, so that's how we can kind of use this as sort of a simple toggle. And this was just a really basic example of changing the color, but essentially anything you can do on a group object, you could do in here as well. Right, so row group, we used .set background color, but we can basically use all these other options that are available to us as well. Right, so we could even use set background image, for example, image named. Let's see, what image do I have in here? I think I have heart in here. And let's see what this looks like. And play around with it, see what works. Tinker with it, that's a good way to learn. And I suspect this is going to look kind of weird, but we'll see what it does. Okay, it's loading up. Okay, we'll tap it again. Yeah, so it set the background image and it squished it so that it fit into the container as a little heart. But okay, well, that's pretty interesting. Yeah, we are now accessing the func table method, which is pretty nice to be able to do. Next thing I want to do is I'm going to add in another row controller in here. We'll see how easy it is to kind of set that one up as well in a separate file. So all I need to do really is, okay, so we have my row controller. We'll just add another prototype, aka another row here. You can see that it automatically kind of popped down. So here's my row controller. It popped down another table row controller. And essentially we just need to follow the same steps to set the rows for this one. So we'll need to give it a name. Identifier, what should we name this one? Let's call it, let's see, my second row controller. Not super descriptive, but it's going to work for our purpose here. And then we have a group. You know what? Inside the group, let's add maybe, let's see, a date object. Yeah, we'll put that in there. And let's see, let's set the size here. So we'll say relative to the container. Now we'll leave it on size to fit content. Okay, so now we have another group with something different inside of it. Now let's figure out how we can give basically a class to my second row controller. So it's going to be pretty much like we did before. So here's my row controller class.swift. We'll create another new file, and we want it to be a WatchKit class, that's for sure. Okay, and class, let's call this one my second row controller class. Again, not super good in terms of naming conventions, but it's self-descriptive for us anyway. Subclass, make sure you have NS object selected. We don't want it to be any other type. Language, make sure that it is Swift. Okay, next it's going to ask where to save it. We'll just save it in the same root that everything else is saved in. Okay, so now we have my row controller class and my second row controller class. Now don't forget, we need to go back to our storyboard and select the second row controller, and we need to tell it what class that it belongs to. We do that in the identity inspector here. Right, so my second row controller class. Okay, and now we've created that association, and now we're free to kind of alter it as we see fit. So let's go into our assistant editor, and let's attach our label here to an outlet. And so we'll go here, and we'll make sure we're selecting the right code. So my second row controller class. All right, and we'll pop this side panel back out. We'll grab our date object. Okay, bring it over like so. My date. All right, and now we can manipulate the date object if we need to. But let's see if this will populate initially. And I think you can probably figure out what's going to happen here. But you know what? Let's take a look in the simulator anyway. And in the meantime, I'm going to set this back to 200%. Okay. And let's take a look at the simulator. Okay, where's our date? Well, we haven't told the table to create these rows yet. Right, so we do have to remember to do that as well. So we'll go back to the interface controller. And we'll go up here. So where we do our initial setup here, so func awake. Right, so this is where we initially set up the table. Set number of rows, fruits.count with row type, my row controller. Well, we just need to basically do that again. So my table dot, and what do we need to do here? We're going to insert some rows here. Insert rows at. Let's set it so it inputs it after the initial fruits are input. We will just basically tell it to use fruits.count. Keep going until fruits.count plus 1. And with row type, well, let's put in what we called this controller. So this one I believe was my second row controller. Okay, and so this is going to know to insert it at the end of our fruits array. And we should therefore have one date object there, showing up beneath our other fruits objects. Now if we run this in our simulator, we'll be able to see that we are showing one date row basically at the end of our fruits array essentially. Then when we add or remove, it's going to add it to the end of our fruits array because that's where we told it to do it initially. Right, so here's our simulator, and there we can see our date object right here. Now, I'm not going to click on it because that would actually cause it to crash because we only have one table, and basically it would try to use the controller that we didn't associate with this specific row, but otherwise we can add, and we can still click on those. We can remove those as well, but if I try to click on this, you will see that it's going to crash, and it's really not happy because it shows you where it caught the problem here, right? So it's trying to associate it with something that it doesn't belong to. So that's why that's happening, which is always unpleasant, but you know, a crash is not going to hurt anything. In fact, it's a really good way to learn, is to cause crashes. Now, this is one way to insert rows. Say you've already created your table and you don't want to go back and recreate it. A different way we can create it is to use a different methodology here. So what I'm going to do for now is I'm going to leave this code up, but I'm just going to comment it out so that we can refer to it if we need to. Okay, so this will no longer be effective. Now, what I want to do is say my table dot set row types. And here you can see that row types is an array of strings, and each string will be basically the name of a controller. So set row types. Row types, we will pass it an array here, and our row types are going to be my row controller, right? And we also have my second row controller. Okay, and this will basically create as many rows as needed, well, as many rows as controllers we have, in this case 2. And let's see what it does. Okay, this is just an alternate way, and if you know from the start you're going to have multiple controllers, this is arguably a better way to do it. I mean, there's nothing wrong with the way we did it initially, but this is kind of an alternate way. So let's take a look. Yeah, so it created one, and then it created another, and then it's up to us at this point to figure out how to populate these, kind of as we did before. Right, so we're going to have to do some similar logic to what we were doing here, but in terms of actually setting it up, this is maybe a more efficient way of doing it. Let's set up our rows here. So what I'm going to do, so right now we have 2 rows, right? We have one and then another. So what if we want to insert rows? Well, we can definitely do that. And then we'll kind of come back and we'll adjust our set row types in a bit here to kind of fix what error we might encounter. So let's say my table.insert rows, and we're going to tell it where to insert using an index set. So we're going to start at 0, and we're going to keep going until we reach 1 less than fruit.count. Right? Fruit.count will be 5, and we want to have it go until 4, because 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, that equals 5. So we'll just do index to insert at here, because remember we kind of configured it here to be fruits.count, and dot dot less than will give us 4 back in our case. Okay, and then we will say with row type, well, this one of course will be my row controller. All right, let's insert some other rows as well here. So I'll put it down another line. My table dot insert rows at takes another index set, and we're going to insert these basically at index to insert at dot 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 index to insert at. Right, so this will insert at index 5, basically, because we don't have anything there currently. It's going to just kind of append it to the end. And this one will be my second row controller. Okay, let's try it out. Let's see if it crashes. Let's see if it works. Okay, build succeeded. There it goes. All right, so it didn't crash, it's always a plus. But a little bit of a weird behavior here. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 labels, and then we have our other controller here, our date. But notice we still kind of have these other ones down below. So why is that? Well, essentially what we did was we created 2 rows when we did set row types. Then we inserted rows basically on top of those, so up above those. And then it just kind of pushed those initial rows we defined down below. Now there's a couple ways we could approach this to solve it. One thing we could actually do is, you know what, we can just get rid of this set row types, for example. And then it's just going to kind of configure it off the bat using these row type controllers that we defined. So instead of saying set number of rows, we can just kind of insert on the fly. It'll populate those and instantiate the classes we need. Right, so there it goes. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 looks like. And then we have our date object. So that's one way. And then a different way, you know, not necessarily a better way, but a different way is, so let me get rid of this now. And another thing you can do is when you say set row types, if you just put the number of rows you want kind of consecutively. So for example, we have my row controller, and let's say we want 5 of these. Well, I just have to enter it in 5 times basically. My row controller, and it's going to create a new row for every time we call it here. Okay, so that's 1, 2, 3, 4. We'll do one more. My row controller. Okay, and then we only have the one controller for the second row, or I guess this will be the 5th row. So let's load this up. Let's see what it does. And we'll see that it's just kind of an alternate way of doing it. So, you know what, it's probably set multiple rows, or set row types would be good if you have a whole bunch of different controllers. Right now it's not super efficient, right? We're just kind of repeating ourselves over and over, and then a change on the last one. But if you had, I don't know, 6 or 7 different types of controllers, hard to imagine when that would be the case, but it could happen. You could do it that way as well. Right? So then we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then we have our date down below. And now, as long as we have the rows and as long as they exist, we can then kind of instantiate them with information. So let's say we wanted to do that. So we can say, we'll do a for loop. In fact, we're basically going to use this code down here. So I'm just going to rewrite it. For index fruit in fruits.enumerated. And we will say let row equals my table dot row controller at index, which would be 0 all the way up to index 4, as my row controller class. Right, row.label text equals whatever fruit we are on at that given index. Okay. Then since we only have one in our second row, we could do something simple like this. Let row 2 equals my table dot row controller at, what index are we at? Let's go with index to insert at, just because I know that that's going to be 5, and it's just kind of handy for us to be able to do that. As my second controller class. Okay, and now we can actually say row2 dot my group, or my date rather, dot set text color, we'll go with UI color, dot green. All right, let's test it out. Let's make sure it works. And you can see the logic is very similar, and there's multiple different ways of accomplishing whatever you need, and whatever style you prefer will be just fine. Okay, let's wait for this to load up. There we go. Okay, we have our fruits. We have our date object, and that's pretty nice. Right? And because we didn't change our code down below where we tap the button, we can still kind of tap to change the color. But again, if we tap the date, it's going to crash. We can also still add and remove though. Right, so add, remove, and that is a different way of doing basically the same thing. Let's tinker around with our tables some more. So when I set up the table, I'm going to do it a different way here. So kind of the way we saw before. So instead of set row types, my controller 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You know, I could maybe throw this in a for loop, for example, but the easier way really is to just kind of do it the sort of shortcut way. So let's insert rows here. Insert rows, and this will also kind of instantiate our table at the same time. So we're going to start at 0, dot, dot, less than index to insert at. Right? This is essentially us saying 0 to dot, dot, 4, because it's less than 5 here. And with row type, right, we know that this is going to be my row controller. Okay, that's one set of tables. My table dot insert rows at index set, and we will start at index 5. Index to insert at dot 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 index to insert at with row type my second row controller. Okay, and just for the purpose of this demo, I'm just going to comment these out just to show something off. So when I launch this, it'll work, and it'll instantiate our rows. And let's see here. Oh, we're going to have too many rows because I forgot to take this top part out, but that's okay. So we'll let this load. We'll take a look at it. Yes, we have way too many rows, but let me get rid of this code. I'm just going to erase this. And what I want to show you is if your index set is incorrect here, you might not realize it at first. So let me demonstrate that. So instead of 5 dot 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 5, which is basically creating one row, if we do 5 dot dot 4, let's see if it gives us any error message to tell us, hey, you made a mistake here. Okay, build succeeded. So far, no error message. When it launches up, it's not going to show an error message also. Spoiler alert. So it doesn't show us the error message, but if you notice, it's not showing us our row down here, our date object. And this could be bad, right? So if your controller down below also had a label, it might be hard to differentiate it. So the way you would find out, and this is going to cause a crash, but here's where I instantiate our my date object basically, right? So we tell it, hey, at this row, do this thing. But it's going to try to put it into a row that actually doesn't exist. So we're trying to insert rows, but it didn't know where to insert it, so it just didn't do anything. It just kind of failed silently. And now it's going to crash. So it built it okay, but now when it tries to instantiate the table, let's watch, yeah, crash. And this is kind of crash you'll see. And as you can see here, unexpectedly found nil while unwrapping an optional value. Okay, so kind of a cryptic message there, but it's basically because it tried to instantiate a row that doesn't exist. So just want to be aware of that. Just want to be careful of that. So let's put this back the way it was. Okay, and now I will uncomment this as well so that it instantiates it how we like it. Okay, and we'll just make sure that runs. In the meantime, let's take a look at the next thing we might want to consider doing. So I'll also get rid of this code here because we're not using that anymore either. Okay, so you can see there's not too many lines of code now to set up our table. So what seemed like maybe a lot before, it's actually not too bad, right? So we just have to kind of know how to access it. Now let's take a look at our function table here. So right now what happens is, okay, we can click here, we can add and click those and we can remove them. But if I were to tap on this date object, it would crash. Right, so let's crash it on purpose and let's see what it tells us. Right, so it tells us actually right here, could not cast value of type. And it's highlighting this where we try to create a constant assigned to the row. Right, it can't cast a row controller class because our object in that row controller, it's not a part of my row controller class. Right, so it's kind of crashing there for that reason. So we have to figure out some kind of logic to fix that. So maybe some kind of conditional statement to detect what row index we are on. So how are we going to figure that out? Well, we have a handy index to insert at variable here. And we do kind of check that when we instantiate that row, right? That's where we insert our second row, index to insert at. And also when we add, we increase the index to insert at, by 1. And when we remove, we decrease it by 1 as well. So you know what, that sounds to me like something that we can be checking. So you know what, if row index is equal to index to insert at, and for now let's just return from the function. So we don't have any special action yet, but let's see if this works first of all. Let's see if our logic is sound here. Okay, so we'll load that up. And here we go. Okay, so first of all, let's kind of walk through it. So this is index 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So theoretically, the index to insert at should always match, in our simple case, this date object. And if we tick here, it's going to do this check and it's going to return. But let's try it out. So this still works, that still works. Try it here, that still works. Okay, fingers crossed, I'm going to tap the date object and no crash. Pretty neat, right? And now I can add, I can still tap that, and if I tap this, because we are incrementing our index to insert at, it's not going to crash, right? So some pretty simple logic, and it's no different from really any other if statement. Cool. Let's figure out what we want to do here when we tap the date object row. So first of all, let's kind of split this off into separate functions because this override func table is getting kind of unwieldy now. So what I'm going to do is I will create another function here, func set background color, and it's going to take in, let's see, what it's going to take in. It's going to take in the index. Okay. Index will be an integer. And then we will just basically take all this here. Cut, paste. And here we will say set background color. Index will be row index. Okay, and then we just change these to be index. Okay, now we have a discrete function that does one thing. Well, basically two things, but really one thing. Then let's do another function here for the date object. So func, maybe this should not be set background color. This should be change background color. That kind of makes a little bit more sense in my mind anyway. Okay, func change date, and this as well we will take in the index, which will be an int, and then let's figure out our logic. Okay, so first of all we'll just do a return here just to be sure. So change date, index will be row index. Okay, so let's make sure this is working first of all before we go any further. We're checking for errors. At this point, if we catch any errors, it would be a lot easier to fix than if we did it later on. Okay, there it goes. Great, so it's working. I can still tap. If I tap here, oh, it's going to crash. Okay, because we returned and then it tried to run the rest of the code. That's fine, we can fix that. Alright, so we'll get back to how it was looking before. Okie dokie. So I'll just add a return statement here as well. So we'll return from the function and then we'll return from the if statement. And that should prevent any crashes. And then while that's loading up, let's think about this. So we'll do another variable here. So let row equals my table dot row controller at index as my second row controller class. Okay, and let's test out our code here now that it's loaded up. So that's okay. We tap here, no crash. Good. Okay, so now we have a row, and now we can say row dot my date dot set. Let's see, what are we gonna do here? Start out simple. We'll do set text color again, and we'll say UI color dot cyan. Yeah, cyan's a good eye-catching color. Okay, let's see if it works. Okay, no build errors. Here comes the simulator. All right, let's tap it. Cool, it's working as expected. Let's do some other kind of similar logic as what we're doing down here. So I'm going to bring up the code for that over on the left here. So where can I find that here? It should be in the extension, my second row controller class. Okay, so let's make a variable switched again. Will be a bool. We'll default it to false. And you know what? Let's follow our naming convention from earlier. So I'll switch this to selected actually. Okay, that way it's going to make probably a little bit more sense internally. Okay, so we'll say if row dot selected, what will we do? Well, we'll switch it. Row dot selected equals false. And this is what we'll do. So, what color should our kind of default color be? Let's go with white maybe. Okay, so if row is selected, it's false, and then it sets it to white. Else, row dot selected equals true. Row dot my date dot set text color UI color dot cyan. All right, great. Okay, loading it up here. Let's try it out. Cool. So maybe we shouldn't initialize it to be that green color. Yeah, so get rid of that here. Okay, and then it is working as expected. Right, logic is the exact same for this one and that one, really. We're just kind of switching between two states. But what about if we wanted to do something different as well? So let's say, you know, my row, my date, dot set calendar. And what calendar do we want to use? So let's go with calendar. And then we say calendar dot identifier. Calendar identifier dot let's see here. Well, this one will reset it. So let's put it to Gregorian. And we probably have to put in identifier. Let's see here. We need this. Okay, spacing is a little weird. Yeah, we're missing. Oops, we're missing identifier. Okay, I'll disable or delete this breakpoint. Okay, so you know what? I'm going to get rid of this text color changing, and we'll just kind of change the calendar on tap. So this one, row selected true, row dot my date dot set calendar. Calendar. We'll use identifier. Calendar dot identifier dot let's go with Buddhist. It'll be interesting to see what that one looks like. Okay, cool. So again, we're just kind of switching between two different states of the calendar, but it'll be pretty neat to see. Oh, I spelled the calendar wrong again. All right, that should fix it. Let's build it again. Build succeeded. Okay, and this we will be able to switch back and forth. Okay, so this is Gregorian, this is Buddhist. Neat. All right, and I mean, obviously you could put this logic elsewhere too, so you could have a dedicated button to say switch calendar. You could have a toggle as well, so you could toggle it, so just a switch to switch between one state and the other, and it would be the same logic in any case. Next, just for practice, let's say instead of adding and removing the upper controller, when we say add or remove, we'll be focusing on this the date object instead. So that's actually a pretty simple, straightforward change. So where we have the function for the my button, first of all, we can say my table insert rows at, let's see, we'll just do +1 here instead. +1 and then +2. All right, and we'll just change the with row type as well. So my second row controller. Right, we're kind of hacking it in, really. This is not really an ideal way, but you know what? For our purpose, it's going to work here. It should work anyway. So this should be all we need to do, really, to be able to insert rows. Let's try it out, though. So wait for this to load up. Okay, add. Hey, there we go. Okay, this does bring us another problem, though, which is if I try to tap on it now, it's going to crash because our logic check is not super sound in terms of our table. Right? We're basically checking, is the row index exactly the same as the index to insert at? Which is not really what we want to check anymore because we are incrementing that, so that's going to be kind of changing. But what's something in our table that's always going to be the same that we can compare this against? Right, so for example, we are always incrementing it after all the fruits are set initially. Right, so we have a let statement here. It's a constant. So these, in theory, this data will not change. What will change is basically our date objects, right? Our date rows. So that means we just kind of alter our logic there a little bit. So instead of checking against index to insert at, let's check if it's greater than or equal to fruits.count. Right? So this way, if it's 5 or higher in terms of the index, it's just going to run change date. Otherwise, we'll just run change background color. Right? Again, just a reminder that you have to just manipulate your data however it needs to be manipulated, basically. So let's load that up. Let's double check that it's working, and then we'll go into the remove button as well. Okay, so add, I can tap this, I can tap that. Cool. Now what about our remove methodology? Well, let's see here. So we still want this statement here. We don't want it to crash because we don't want it to go into the negative. And we still want to decrement it as well. But instead of remove rows at this index, let's just kind of do the same thing. So +1, +2. Okay, let's see how that works. And basically we're just targeting a higher index, of course. Okay, build succeeded. Awesome. And it's going to load up here. There we go. So we can add. Fingers crossed, we remove. It doesn't crash. Uh-oh, it's removing the rest. Well, you know what? That's okay. We just can add another conditional statement there. Yeah, and it crashed because we went too far in terms of our deleting. So let's fix that. And you know what we can do? We can just do one of these. If index to insert at is less than fruits.count, then we'll just return. Let's try that. Okay, build succeeded. There it goes. Okay, so if we remove, okay, it's not letting us remove the actual fruits, but we can still add and tap on that. We can still tap on this. And great, so with a couple extra lines of code, we change the behavior of our table.